All right, everybody, we'll get going tonight. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Leah Holloway. I'm the program manager with Milwaukee Riverkeeper and one of the administrators for the plastic-free MKE movement, which we'll talk about a little bit in a few minutes. We're really excited to be here tonight with our this amazing team from the Medical College of Wisconsin to talk about plastics and health. There's so much information that have been coming out recently about this topic, and we just wanted to give everyone an opportunity to really ask a lot of questions and be informed on what this is, what's happening with all the plastics that we're ingesting and that we're exposed to on a regular basis. So few quick housekeeping items. We are recording. You probably got that message, so that we'll put it up on our YouTube and Facebook pages later so folks can catch it. We will also share again the recording of the Beyond Plastics health conversation that we're going to summarize here today. So in case you missed that, you can go back and watch that as well. That was another really great conversation on plastics and health. We've got a brief presentation for you here today, and then we're going to jump into some of the questions that you all submitted when you registered. But also, please feel free to ask questions throughout. You can drop those into the chat, and I will moderate our Q&A session. So we'll make sure that we get through as many of those questions as we can tonight. And so with that, I think we'll get started. All right. Alexis, do you want to go to the next slide for me? I'll kick us off.
I'm the one talking with my mute on, but yeah, we can go ahead and get the next slide here.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I do that on at least once in every presentation. So just some quick introductions to the different groups here today. If you're new to Plastic-Free MKE, we are a movement that was formed in 2018. We're composed of volunteers, businesses, nonprofits, government agencies, anyone looking to help reduce their plastic consumption, or on a bigger level. Plastic-free is really focused on reducing plastics on a systemic level. So the individual actions we can all take are great, but the plastic conundrum, the plastic problem, is so huge that it's really going to take collective action and systemic change to really make a big difference. So those are the types of things that Plastic-Free is focused on. So we've got a lot of volunteer opportunities, and then also if you're a part of an organization or a group, we have a lot of opportunities for you to get involved in some of those bigger systemic changes that we're trying to make throughout Milwaukee. And I'll talk more about those later on, because a lot of them tie into some of the questions that you all asked about what we can do and what is Plastic-Free doing to kind of help improve our health when it comes to plastics. And so there'll be more information about that later on. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our team from the Medical College of Wisconsin to introduce themselves and take it away.
All right, cool. Well, I can start off by introducing myself. So I'm Alexis. I'm a third year medical student rather at the Medical College of Wisconsin. Yeah, definitely been interested in this climate change stuff, which has led to learning more about plastics and different health effects of not only plastic, but some of the other effects of climate change as well. So I've been working with a lot of great people like the other two with me here. So I'll pass it over to them for intros as well.
All right, my name is Jack Kester. I am a second year medical student at the Medical College of Wisconsin, and I currently serve as the president of one of our student groups called Medical Students for a Sustainable Future, where we're just kind of focusing on what we're doing to the environment is having on our health and our community's health. And it's also an organization that Alexis served on when she was a second year.
Okay, hi everybody, I'm Dr. Joanne Bernstein. I am an assistant professor at the Medical College of Wisconsin. I serve as an internal medicine physician at the Zablocki VA, and I also serve as the faculty advisor to the Medical Students for a Sustainable Future for the MCW students. And I'm just really happy that you guys brought us in today to not only present to you, but to learn from this process. And just excited to be here. So thank you for giving us this opportunity.
All right, cool. Jack, are you ready to get started then if I move on to the next slide?
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. All right. Cool.
All right, so we're just kind of going to start out by summarizing the key points from the Beyond Plastics webinar that happened about a week ago. So a little bit about the speaker, Dr. Philip Landrigan. He is a pediatrician and epidemiologist and serves as the director of Boston College's Global Public Health Program. His research is focused on the health impacts of environmental toxic chemicals. And in fact, in 1970, he found that low-level lead exposure reduces children's IQ, which led to the EPA's 1975 decision to remove lead from paint and gasoline. And then in 1990, his documentation of children's sensitivity to pesticides contributed to the enactment of the Food Quality Protection Act of 1996. So this guy really knows what he's talking about. Long story short, he established the EPA's Office of Children's Health Protection, and then recently co-chaired the Lancet Commission on Pollution and Health. So what is plastic? It's made up of carbon chains called polymers and also has multiple chemical additives in it, depicted by these beautiful colored circles in our picture here. These additives include phthalates, biphenyls, PFAs, brominated flame retardants, and more. And these additives can be highly toxic, including carcinogenic, which basically means cancer causing. They can be neurotoxicants and endocrine disruptors. And they can often comprise up to 50% of the weight of plastics. And then it's important to note that these additives aren't as stable as the carbon-carbon bonds that you see in this picture. So as plastic is degraded, these additives are susceptible to diffusing out of the plastic and getting into our environment and our bodies.
Really dumb analogy here, but sometimes I like to think about the like kind of polymer part of the plastic as like the bracelet part of a charm bracelet, and these additives are like the charms on the charm bracelet. And if you want to think back to the early 2000s when those were popular and how often the charms fell off, it's very similar to how easily additives fall off as well.
So I thought this figure did an excellent job of depicting how plastic can kind of affect us at every stage of its life cycle, and basically how human health starts at production. So a little bit of background, in manufactured chemical additives, around 98% of them are made from oil and gas, and mostly are new materials that have been invented since 1950 and are used in millions of consumer products. And many of these additives are added to plastic. So during the stages of production, use, and disposal, toxic chemicals can leak out of plastics and these production/manufacturing plants and get into our environment, leading to near universal human exposure. So kind of per this figure, you can see like the direct health effects that this exposure has on individuals, both working directly with plastics and individuals even living just in close proximity to these plants. So kind of like in that left box, you can see how, for example, like coal miners, they're susceptible to silicosis, cardiovascular disease, lung cancer, and then so forth as you go through. So for these fence line communities, oftentimes there's disproportionate heavy exposure to poor and minority communities because that just happens to be where these factories are built. So that kind of brings up the issue of environmental injustice when we're talking about what the effects of these chemicals are having on people. And then in addition, wildlife and ecosystems are also greatly affected by these waste exposures. So in his talk in the webinar, Dr. Landrigan did a fantastic job discussing how human health is inexplicably linked to planetary health. Ultimately, civilization depends on human health, prosperous natural systems, and the conservation of our natural resources. So basically, any damage that we do to the environment kind of comes back to bite us. And I think this figure does a great job of kind of visualizing that idea. So kind of starting at the inner part of that circle, that's the direct effects that that's like how our environment and how our climate is changing. So like rising temperatures, extreme weather, rising sea levels. And then as you branch outward from that, that kind of shows how that can have a direct effect on different aspects of human health, like the increase in air pollution leading to higher rates of asthma or cardiovascular disease. So basically, what can we do about this? I do want to point out first and foremost that plastic recycling is a scam that might not be known by a lot of people. Only 8% of all US plastic is actually recycled compared to 6 to 8% of paper and 90% of glass. In addition, much of the recycled plastic is actually ends up being burned, which kind of further contributes to air pollution. And then thinking about it, plastic can't be truly recycled because it is so chemically diverse and made up of so many toxic additives. So as it's being recycled, these additives break down and leach out into the environment. So kind of talking about this slide, public policy, I think, is the most important thing that we can do. Eliminate single-use plastic, establish alternatives to plastic recycling, establish global human biomonitoring to kind of visualize what the exposure is that people are having to these toxic chemicals, and then requiring manufacturers to take full financial responsibility for products across their entire life cycle, including being responsible for handling the waste, and then designing safe and sustainable alternatives from renewable feedstocks. So obviously that sounds like a lot, more than any one person can do by themselves. So kind of at the individual level, just try to reduce your plastic use, raise awareness. I think that's probably the most important thing you can do, because it puts more pressure on government systems to start regulating these plastic manufacturers to take accountability for what they're doing to the environment and to people's health, and then get out there and vote. And I want to point out that it's important to remember it's not all on you, so don't feel guilty for using plastic, because the system's kind of set up right now where sometimes it's often the only option. But I think just being aware of the health effects of what it's having can lead to pretty great changes in our communities and in our world. So just want to thank you guys for that. And then Alexis, you can take it away.
Sounds good. So yeah, that covers, in case you missed it, the Beyond Plastics summary there. So just moving on, these are just some additional thoughts that we had as we were going through papers, looking more into this topic, discussions between ourselves. So some quick definitions. The term microplastic gets thrown around a lot. What a microplastic is it's any particle or fiber that is made up of plastic, of course, and under 5 microns, which, if you want to know what 5 microns is, that's about the size of a sesame seed. I've also seen the term nanoplastics a lot, and that is less than 1 micron, which, in putting it into a size term, that would be the width of a human hair. So definitely very tiny possibilities that these plastics can get broken down into. The problem is they stay stuck in that microplastic and nanoplastic form and have a very hard time disappearing. As for how this stuff gets into ourselves, our human bodies, there are 3 main microplastic exposure routes. The first one is ingestion. We unfortunately eat a whole lot of microplastics, especially if you, like me, use tea bags. Tea bags is a prime example of microplastics getting in. Unfortunately, those things are filled with microplastics in addition to whatever tea suits your fancy. In addition to that, inhalation is another one. We do unfortunately breathe in plastic particles. A lot of these come from urban dust, specifically from synthetic textiles, like the clothes that we're wearing, those lovely like polyester and all of those things. So people who work in those fields are unfortunately more at risk for inhaling those particles on a regular basis. And finally, this one is probably a little weird to think about in comparison to the other two, but we can actually absorb this stuff through our skin or have contact with this through our skin. Prime example of this is a lot of those like exfoliating face washes and other products geared towards skin, of course, have those like little micro beads in them. And while those are too big to actually like cross into the skin, they can hang out on hair follicles, get in that way. If you have a cut in your skin, that's a really great way for them to get inside too. Whether or not they get fully into the human body and move around and go to different places or reach end organs is how we like to put it. So those are like liver, kidney, lungs, depends on a few things. One, the size of the particle. Two, things like, shape, if they're a fiber versus a particle, and whether or not they like to stick to things like water or even fat. All of that determines how far they get. And sometimes they're able to cross right into cells. Other times it's immune cells that pick them up and bring them to different locations. And these immune cells, one example is a macrophage, which I like to think of as a little Pac-Man, just like going around grabbing stuff and then bringing it back. So those can pick up those plastics like Pac-Man and bring it to you, different organs, your immune system, and different things like that. Okay, so we know they can get in, but what does that mean? And so let's discuss the direct effects of these microplastics first. So this kind of boils down to the microplastics and what the microplastics are carrying, and that's where you get the toxins coming into the picture. So to be honest, we don't entirely know what these microplastics themselves are doing. Most of the data that we have are from animal studies, and how those actually like translate over to humans, we're not entirely sure. What seems to be a common theme between studies and reviews that we looked into is that they do increase inflammation and spark immune responses. An example of this is that plastics actually came online as a way to assist with like prosthetics and joint replacements. I actually saw a cadaver my first year of med school that had a plastic shoulder replacement, and you could see where like the capsule that was made of plastic was worn down from that friction and that rubbing over a lifetime as the person, moves their limb and all of that. And there has been studies that show that actually causes particles of plastic to break off and cause inflammation at the local site. So something to think about there too is, what is that? Like, what is that doing long-term? And what are the detrimental effects of that? And then naturally, the toxins that we've talked about, those get carried along with these microplastics. Not only that, they are present in wastewater, they can leak into food, they are released into fumes when plastics get incinerated. And so many of these are actually on the EPA list of chemicals of concern. And a problem here is that the burden of proof that these toxins are dangerous actually falls to the EPA, not to the people who are manufacturing them. So there's a mismatch here, similar to, I would say, cigarettes a few decades ago of, cigarettes got invented, they came out on the market, and then people started using them, and then we found out the ill health effects, and then we had to like backpedal, and we're still backpedaling today. Same kind of thing here of, we put the toxins into the plastic, we use them, they work great, and like, oh no, all these studies come out that there's bad stuff with these toxins, and then we have to backpedal and try to take them all out. So it's kind of a very similar thing here. And then another kind of direct effect that I thought was interesting is that microorganisms like different types of bacteria love to adhere to certain plastics. This is called a biofilm when they like cover it. And there's actually been some papers that talked about referring to microplastic as a vector for these kind of illnesses, much like we talk about ticks carrying Lyme's disease and those being a vector. So kind of an interesting parallel there. That's a little funky. So this is a chart from a paper, Alabi et al. That was in a toxicology journal not that long ago. So this is a very busy table. So to orient you a little bit, so we have our toxic additives in the first column here, BPA, phthalates, that gets talked about a lot. This next column tells us what these are in, where we often see them. And then finally, here's like where we get the like kind of creepy possible health effects in this third column here. And then finally, what type of plastics that they are in. So some examples here of additives that we see in plastic. BPA is of course the big one that was in a lot of things, now has been since removed from a lot of things, but some of its major effects were the fact that it can like mimic estrogen. I also read some things that can cause where it was leading to like insulin resistance and obesity and different things like that. Phthalates has been the one that's been talked about, I think, the most recently of like starting to like get on people's radar. That has interference that also has effects on hormones, much like BPA, more so like things like testosterone and stuff like that. Finally, you can also see things like styrene and on here as well, leading to breakdown of DNA or having issues messing with DNA and also possibly causing cancer. So yeah, some interesting findings there. So those were the direct effects. And again, just bringing up the fact that we really want to stress that planetary health equals human health. And the idea here is that, as we've said before, the manufacturing, the disposal of plastics contributes to climate change. And ultimately, it's climate change and the related health effects that have the most potential to damage human health. So that is definitely the thing to focus on here, is that long-term indirect effects. Okay. But the bright side is about like climate change is that there's still time to fix it. And we have some solutions here as well to work towards that.
Awesome. Thanks, Alexis. So we just wanted to pause really quickly and talk about some of the things that Plastic Free MKE is doing and some of the ways that you can get involved with our work. Action in the face of some of this, kind of scary information always feels good. And there are things that we can do, there are steps we can take. And here are some of the ways that Plastic Free MKE is working to reduce our exposure and to limit that impact that plastics are having on planetary health. So we have a series of programs, they're called our Lake Friendly initiatives. And these are different sectors of our community where we're targeting to help them reduce plastics. So we started with businesses. We have almost 30 businesses throughout Milwaukee that we're working with them on a one-on-one basis to help them reduce their plastic usage. So that's both like what they're using, back of house when they're preparing food, but also what they're passing on to their customers. So to-go containers, are they using straws? Are they using plastic silverware? Things like that. We also have a new lake-friendly neighborhood. So Sherman Park is our first lake-friendly neighborhood. And so this is a whole community group. Some of them are here today. Shout out to Sherman Park. Who have committed to really reducing plastics on a neighborhood level, which is really impressive. And we want to start working with more neighborhoods throughout Milwaukee. So if you are a member of like a community group or a neighborhood association and you want to think about what you can do on a bigger level to reduce plastics, reach out to us. We've also supported conferences and meetings in reducing their plastic waste. And we're starting to build out our faith-based lake-friendly program so we can support faith-based groups in looking through their faith communities and how plastics interact there and what we can do to support them in reducing those plastics. We have our water refill station program. So this is where we go out into community events and we provide refillable water stations. So if maybe before you were going to a community event and someone donated plastic single-use water bottles, we would come into that event and provide water in 5-gallon jugs. And we also have aluminum water bottles that we would give away. So really just trying to provide clean and healthy water for the community. We partner with a local vendor on the water. We buy our water bottles as locally as possible. And, we want people need to stay hydrated, especially in the summer when you're out like going to rallies and marches and community events and you're having fun and you're just out in your neighborhood. You got to have water, but you don't have to have it in plastic. We do a lot of educational events and webinars, such as this one. And our upcoming event our next one is going to be on March 18th. It's actually going to be in person at the Milwaukee County Zoo. So the Zoological Society of Milwaukee is one of our Plastic Free MKE coalition partners. And they're doing a ton of sustainability programs over at the zoo. So we're going to go get a tour because who doesn't love the zoo? And also talk a lot about sustainability there. We put together a plastics education toolkit. So, the youth are our future and they're our present. They're using a lot of plastic and they don't often get a choice in what they're using. So working with schools, working with students on building awareness of the plastics problem and helping them share that information. We want students to feel empowered to talk to their school administrators about reducing plastics in their cafeteria. And we want them to feel empowered to go home and talk with their families about, hey, can we switch this out or can we do this a little bit differently? And try and reduce our plastic consumption. So we want to give them the tools and the information to really make changes from a young age. We do a lot of advocacy work. So we're building, we'll talk more about some of the recent legislative things that have happened in Milwaukee, but we're working on, even though Wisconsin has a preemptive ban against banning any type of plastic, we found some creative workarounds at different levels of government near Milwaukee, and we're trying to spread that throughout the state so that we can build momentum. We can, have communities all over the state that are banning straws and banning styrofoam and all these things, and hopefully put enough pressure on the state legislature to make some changes at a state level. We're working on a program called Reuse MKE that would bring a reusable container system to Milwaukee, so that when you go to Pfizer Forum or maybe an event at UWM or the PAPS Theater Group, you might not get a single-use plastic cup or a single-use plastic to-go container. You might instead get a reusable container that when you're done with it, you just drop it in the right bin and it will get washed and someone else will get to use it too. So that's a really exciting system. It's not quite up and running yet, but we're making a lot of progress on it, and we're really excited that Milwaukee will be one of the first communities in the US to have a really robust system. And there's lots of volunteer opportunities. We always need help, sharing information with folks about what we do and how to get involved. It's really fun to volunteer with us. Sometimes you get to dress up like a plastic bag monster. Sometimes you get to spin this wheel that sits on Jules's desk at our office and quiz people about their plastic knowledge. And sometimes, we just do fun things like go to the zoo. So being engaged with us is, we hope, really fun and informative, and it feels really good to be able to take action against this really big problem that we're facing. And I feel like Milwaukee has really got some good stuff going on. We're trying really hard to kind of share what we have and what we know with other communities so that no one has to reinvent the wheel. And we can really work to build systemic change throughout Wisconsin, throughout the Great Lakes region, and even beyond. Awesome, thanks.
Thank you. Also, I want to go to the zoo, but okay. So that leads us to the lovely discussion / question and answer portion of this. So I guess we'll turn it over to you guys and see if you guys have any thoughts.
Yeah, awesome. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And we already had a question about tea bags. So Joanne, thank you for that resource in there. Yeah, if anyone has any other questions, you can put them in the chat, or if you'd rather ask them out loud, feel free to raise your hand or unmute and shout it out. Yeah, Terry, go ahead. I don't know if you're ready to ask your question, but you're still on mute.
Sorry about that. I do that all the time.
Yeah, me too.
Me too.
Jack said that recycling is a scam, and I've heard that before. And so what I want to know is that, does that mean that we shouldn't bother or need not bother putting certain kinds of plastic in the recycling bin? Or what's really worth recycling?
That is a great question. Thank you for asking that. That's something that we talk about a lot. It's still beneficial to recycle some types of plastics. Number 1s, 2s, and 5s are what Milwaukee has a market for. So it's all about the market, right? Like, someone has to be able to collect, clean, and then resell the plastic in order for them, like, they've got to be able to make money doing that in order for them to do it. And so Milwaukee does have a pretty decent recycling market. I don't know the specific like breakdown of like where things are going or where they're selling them to, but we do have a better market than a lot of other communities. It's my understanding that not much of our plastic is just being like recycled by shipping them overseas. And that is, how a lot of communities are fulfilling their recycling duties. So I would really recommend still recycling your 1s, 2s, and 5s, but be really, really careful to follow the recycling guidelines set forth by your municipality. So if you're in Milwaukee or any of the service areas that are covered by the Milwaukee Department of Public Works, sorry, just lost my train of thought. If you're not within that service area, make sure you reach out to your local municipality and you follow those recycling instructions very carefully, because when we recycle carelessly or quickly, and you know, it's something called wish cycling, where I'm so guilty of this. Like, I really want this to be recyclable to justify the fact that I bought this plastic. We actually make that recycling process a lot harder and more expensive. So the best thing you can do is make sure that you're following your local municipality's recycling rules. All right.
No,
Yes.
I have another question too, if I may.
Yeah.
We're now living in a building that is serviced by Waste Management. Do you know if the plastics picked up by Waste Management are treated the same way?
That I'm not sure on. Waste Management is a private hauler, and I'm not sure what their actual recycling practices are.
Okay.
Yeah, but thank you for asking that. That's something that I am hoping to look into a little bit more this year to better understand that, because I know that they're a pretty big hauler in the area. And I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat about the previously submitted questions, and yes, we do have those. So I'm going to jump to some of those too, but I wanted to give folks a chance to ask some live questions as well. Diana, go ahead. Oh, sorry, Alexis.
Oh, no, you're good. I was just going to apologize for disappointing people about the tea bags, but that's
I know. Plastic is such a tough thing. It's kind of a bummer when you look into it. All right, Diana, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I know that plastic bags or film is not recycled through municipal collection, but stores like Pick and Save and others have bins out there. I'm just wondering if you have any indication at all about the success, or sometimes I wonder, those bins are like overloaded with plastic bags, and I'm wondering, are they just there to look good or make themselves look good, or are those plastic bags actually get recycled in some manner?
That's a good question. And that'll depend on the individual store. There are mechanisms for those to get recycled. Whether or not they're actually following that, or if they're just greenwashing, that's really hard for us to know. But what those get turned into, because they're such a thin, flexible, they're not a tough plastic, it's really hard for them to turn them into much. Those get turned into things like park benches and plastic decking. So plastic is downcycled. It's not actually, like, you don't turn a plastic bottle into a plastic bottle, you turn it into a t-shirt, and then you turn it into a park bench, and then it gets thrown away. Versus like glass, you can in theory recycle it forever, right? So that plastic film can have at least one more life after the plastic bag usage. But you are correct that a lot of those, like, they might wind up just getting thrown away. You have to collect so much of that film for anyone to buy it from you. I've heard before that it's like a shipping container size of like plastic that you have to collect, which is why, for instance, Outpost locally does not collect them, because they don't have any place to put the shipping containers to store all the plastic until they've got enough to sell it. So that's something that they thought very carefully about before they made that decision, because they just couldn't do it responsibly, so they chose not to do it. You have to collect a lot of it, and then you've got to find a market to sell it, and then you've got to hope that seller, or that whoever buys it from you, is responsible with it. So there's a lot of opportunities for it to go wrong, for sure. But there's hope that that is actually getting turned into park benches and things like that, and has at least one more life. Yeah, any other quick questions that people want to say out loud? Otherwise, I'm going to jump to the questions we have that you all submitted. Yeah, Kelly, go ahead.
Hey, I just want to put a plug in for just thinking about our daily sleep habits and how much plastic is in our mattresses. And if you have any kind of polyester sheets, or, your pillows, things like that, I think that's something that doesn't often get talked about. And we spend like a third or more of our life in bed. So just, when you have the next opportunity to buy new sheets, or if you're thinking about buying a new mattress, thinking about buying cotton and wool and things like that, I think is a big part of it, gets overlooked.
Yeah, thank you for commenting on that. That's definitely something that we're not talking about enough and thinking about. I have some amazing eucalyptus sheets if anyone's looking for recommendations. I've been fielding these answers, but Joanne and Alexis and Jack, feel free to jump in if you have anything to add to the questions that have come up so far.
I think your answers are so thorough, and so much of this information is so hard to track down because it definitely varies, like you said, by municipality, and then it depends on the processing plant itself and what sort of technology they have right at their recycling center. And so, like, how much of their process is actually automated? What are their automatic sort of capabilities? So sometimes, not to confuse the situation even more, but like if a number one plastic is in the shape of a milk jug, then maybe it gets taken off the line. But if it's in the shape of something else, like a tray, it might not. But I think like your advice to just follow as well as you can the guidelines within your municipality is like the number one way to go. And then just sort of let the process take over after that. And while, you know, not all of it is ending up as recycled, if you just throw your, you know, number ones and number twos in the trash, then they will, you know, 100% end up in landfill. But if you follow your recycling, there's some chance that they might not. And so that's where I think the benefit comes in. So anyway, I'm really impressed because I can only imagine the amount of research and time dedicated to figuring out some of this stuff.
We get these questions a lot, so I've had a lot of practice with some of them. So yeah, it's a really common question, right? Like my mom texted me the other day. She's like, I just read this Greenpeace article and I don't know what to do. So people come to us in Plastic Free all the time with personal questions too. All right, so let's see. Let's jump into some of I will definitely put my eucalyptus sheet recommendation in the chat for those of you who are interested. I adore them. And I want to jump into some of these questions because you all submitted some really amazing questions before we got started. So, okay, so we're going to start. I've got too many screens open here. Oop, nope, don't do that. Okay, so the first one that we got was, how can we inspire our plastic producers to take responsibility for the plastic that they generate? And I will let any of you jump in with that one.
Jack had come up with a really good answer for this, so I think we should turn it over to him.
Jack, I think it mimics a lot of what you already said on your slide. If you can maybe restructure it for this question.
Yeah, so kind of what I talked about before was generating public awareness to put increased pressure on like government agencies to create laws to limit the impacts of these big plastic producers. Because when you think about it, ultimately they're motivated by profit. So realistically, they're not going to change their ways because they feel bad about what they're doing. They're going to change their ways because by law they're being required to. So at the individual level, that's kind of something I believe is the most important, is just using your voice, raising awareness, going to like talks like these, learning more about what the harmful effects of these plastics are, and then kind of using what you learn from like a talk like this and telling your friends, telling people you interact with, and just kind of getting the word out there. Because I think ultimately this issue is not very well known. So yeah, just kind of becoming knowledgeable on the topic.
And then partnering with your allies like Plastic Free Milwaukee to work towards advocacy, right? Because advocacy as an individual is can be really daunting. You can burn out, but if you're with allies, then other people can sort of pull you back up and fill in the gaps when you're not able to do it. And so really kind of finding your allies in advocacy and working towards that. And you know, maybe some good news. We had mentioned with the EPA, unfortunately, the way it's structured, the burden of proof that something is not safe is on the EPA, right? So they have to prove that it's toxic and then sort of retroactively take things off of the market. Whereas the European analog, it's sort of the reverse, where the manufacturers first have to prove something is safe. But what's the positive is that some states are banning certain chemicals, right? So I think it's California right now that's banning PFAS from any food packaging. And so even though that's just in California, that's having a national effect. And so food distributors aren't just, making product for California, they're making product nationally. But when an individual state comes out with that type of regulation, then the manufacturer is going to manufacture to that regulation. And so the good news is that certain states are sort of taking the lead here. But I think advocating at both the state level and or even just the local level, state level, federal level can all have an impact. And then, I mean, similarly, if there are bans for these chemicals in other countries, most companies are producing products that are going to be marketed internationally. And so they're going to work to those standards. So that's maybe the silver lining for some of this, and the sort of disappointment in the EPA.
Yeah, it's all complicated, but the more we can get, small actions happening here and there, and we can build awareness and all that, like we can put pressure, we can nudge in different directions. So those are all really great points. Okay, so next question, what types of plastics are the worst for food storage? This one's super practical, something we can all be thinking about.
Alexis, do you want to talk about that one? Because
Yeah,
the chart that you had.
Yeah, definitely. I could take a stab at this one. So I think one of the main things to think about is, okay, which ones are the plastics that have those things that can leach out? So a big one, of course, is BPA. Fortunately, that's one that's pretty well regulated right now. But that's another one that's BPA can easily leach out. And that's part of the reason that it has since been regulated, because the leaches out causes those health effects, which is not great. Another one is PVC. Which is kind of unfortunate because PVC is like super malleable and super useful. And one thing that I think about with PVC, it has like all those disgusting toxins in it, but a lot of homes are moving towards having PVC pipes for their water systems. And so if you think about how water moves in general, I don't know how much PVC pipes get eroded over time, but that could be a source of microplastics and toxins too, as water moves and strips away things. And as water is sitting in your pipes, it's a way for those toxins to leach into your water system too. And then of course, like polystyrene is another one that's not a great one, which unfortunately styrofoam is everywhere. But so that's another one that's not great for leaching chemicals into your food and water. And a biggest thing, I am notorious for doing this because I bring my Tupperware to school and warm it up in the microwave, and I notoriously put my plastic in the microwave on a regular basis. I know I shouldn't, I know it's bad, but anytime you heat things up, that's a way for chemicals to leach in faster. So just some tips and tricks there too.
Some good news on the styrofoam front. Milwaukee County recently adopted a policy to ban styrofoam in vendor contracts moving forward. So the Milwaukee County owns a ton of properties, and they have a lot of really big vendors that they work with. So what this means is that every time a vendor who operates on county property goes to renew their contract with the county, they will no longer be allowed to use styrofoam products. And I think the language pushes them really to eliminate a lot of single-use plastics, but the focus was on styrofoam because that is one of the most harmful. It's also one of the most prevalent. I know the county courthouse cafe has already or is in the process of eliminating styrofoam. And all of the other county vendors are going to follow. And I think the contracts are on like 6-year cycles. So it might take a while to fully implement, but this is a huge, huge thing. A big win for Milwaukee, for us, for Plastic Free MKE. And you'll start hearing more about it through plastic free promotions. And we're going to make sure that we're messaging about it and making sure that people have the tools they need to make sure that, when you go to the airport and someone hands you something in styrofoam, maybe you can hand them a card that says, hey, did you know? This is, it's a really big, exciting thing that you'll hear more about through Plastic Free, hopefully soon. All right. Our next question that was submitted was, and this is something that was definitely on my mind as well. Do home air purifiers filter out plastic? Do home water filters, and does our water treatment plant?
You guys want me to talk about it?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
So I first, I guess, want to start this by saying I don't think that the amount of particles within our drinking water and our ambient air, so the air we're breathing in our homes or our environments, unless we're working in a plastic plant, is a current obvious threat to our health. And so I don't think, after this, everybody has to go out and buy water filters and HEPA filters. We actually, Leah had reached out to here in Milwaukee, our water processing plant folks, and they did say that the filters were small enough, so their pores were small enough to, was it microplastics? Let's see here. So as the water leaves our filters, we measure the number of size and particles that are 2 microns or larger. So basically it was getting out like almost all microplastics and many of the plastics in the nanoplastic size range, as well as that water is being filtered by our processing plants. And then the at-home filtration system. So if you wanted a water filtration at your home, such as like reverse osmosis, that has filters that would get rid of particles that were in that nano particle range as well. And then the air filtration are HEPA filters. Alexis, do you remember that was anything 0.3 microns or less? So that would get you your microplastics and maybe, and some of your nanoplastics as well.
Yeah, because anything, bigger than 0.3 microns, it can take out. But yeah, I think that's an important thing though, of like, you don't need to like go out and buy a HEPA filter for like the sole purpose of like microplastics. But if you already happen to have one in your home for like allergies or, the HEPA filters were a big thing with COVID, it's kind of like a bonus that you're going to be stripping some of those microplastics out as well. Definitely depends on size though.
This is all so helpful. So our next question was, what is the most effective strategy for us as individuals to limit the amount of plastic we intake?
I can tackle this one. So I guess just some suggestions. Opt for using stainless steel bottles. Look for food products that are stored in glass containers over plastic containers. And store leftovers at home in glass or ceramic containers as opposed to plastic. And then try not to heat your food or liquids in plastic containers. And then also looking at like personal care products, a lot of them contain phthalates, which is one of the more harmful chemical additives. So just kind of looking for personal care products that say phthalate free can be a good way to reduce your exposure. And then I was reading about this last night, something like really simple that you can do. So receipts, I found out, they're printed on thermal paper, which actually contains biphenyls, which are also another one of the more harmful chemical additives that are in plastics. So simply just avoiding handling of like physical receipts is like a good thing. So like if you're using a debit card and they ask if you want a receipt, you can say like, I want the email copy, or I don't want the receipt at all. That's just kind of something simple that you can do to reduce your exposure.
Oh, I didn't even think about receipts. It's always something new. Like I forgot like polyester was synthetic for like a while there. So yeah, it's crazy.
It's everywhere.
Another thing I've heard about receipts is put them in the trash, not in the recycling, so that you don't try and recycle that BPA or what.
Yeah, that's important too, Terry. Thank you. Yeah, and Jack, I'd read that before somewhere too, and it just was one of those like in and out of my head things. So I'm really glad you brought that up. That's such a like a common thing for us to just take a receipt and not think about it.
And it's just such an easy thing to fix. Like just don't do it.
Especially now with so many like contactless payments, and they can just text it right to your phone, and there's a lot of different ways to keep track of your finances these days.
And that's like an important advocacy point too, because like, I'll say no to the receipt mostly because I don't want to carry the receipt in all honesty, but then it still gets printed automatically and then they stick it on like the sharp tack thing or like immediately crumple it and throw it away. So I think like, the more you can work with like, businesses and different things to not even print the receipt in the first place, the better, because that saves them money too, because they're not wasting money on receipt paper.
Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite things that I don't know if we don't talk about it enough or if what it is, but like so many of the things that are better for our health and better for the environment are actually cost saving as well. And somehow that message just hasn't gotten to the folks that are creating things all the time, which always kind of boggles my mind because they're always looking for ways to save money.
Mhm.
I think the important thing too that we haven't talked so much about is that the disproportionate impact or harm that this has on children. And so just from a personal story with the receipts, every time we went someplace, got a receipt, my 2 young daughters would want to play with the receipt, roll it up, have it as a looking scope. And I had no idea. But little kiddos, since they're developing, if they're exposed to these chemicals, can have greater harms than adults. So unfortunately, a lot of these things are disproportionately hurting those who really don't have any control over the situation or knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that we're thinking about in Plastic Free a lot too. And thinking through, especially like food apartheid and food deserts, right? Like the folks who maybe have the least access to fresh food are some of our poorest communities, the ones that are already disenfranchised in a lot of ways. And so really thinking through healthy food access is not a nice to have, it's a need to have for so many different reasons. And it's something that, we need to do better at as a society. So there's so many different ways where plastics really causes a lot of injustices throughout the world. We're lucky that we don't have any like plastic production plants in Milwaukee. There are, facilities throughout Wisconsin that, cause like more localized harm. But right here in Milwaukee, we don't have a ton of that, but there's still a lot of ways where plastics are disproportionately harming other communities. On a lighter note, thank you, Kelly, for sharing the Charlie Barron's podcast about recycling in Milwaukee. So if anyone needs a pick-me-up after our conversation today, Kelly put a link to the Charlie Barron's episode on Milwaukee recycles in the chat. So thank you for that. We definitely got to keep each other like laughing and working together on this stuff. Okay, so I'm kind of looking through these pre-submitted questions too, kind of like the ones that we haven't really talked about yet. So there's a question in here about like Milwaukee Public Schools and how the food is prepackaged. And yeah, there's a lot of waste through the way that the schools are doing lunches right now. And a lot of that comes down to them being incredibly short-staffed. And some of that, like a lot of that is plastic, not all of it is, but a lot of it is. So I did put in the chat earlier in case anyone missed it. MPS is very concerned with this, and there's a lot of different departments that are thinking about plastics, particularly in the cafeterias. With their schools, they serve, more than 70,000 students every day. So they're thinking about it, they're working about it. It's in their sustainability plans, and it's one of the things that they're mandated to do better on. So they're trying to figure out how best to do that. So they are on it, or they're thinking about it, but they don't have any specific answers or solutions just yet. But hopefully they'll be able to address that shortly. And it's something that like Milwaukee Riverkeeper and Plastic Free are both working with them on, like plastics education and also trying to think through some of those systemic things.
Yeah, the question for that one too was like geared towards one concern for the waste, but also concern that there was like stuff leaking in from the saran wrap into the food itself. And on that front, I don't think the exposure at school would be any more from like at home. I would be more worried about, it sounds like it's not processed food. It sounds like it's being made in a kitchen and then distributed. So I think as long as the food are, healthy substances and meeting all of the food pyramid groups and all of that, I think that's way more important than whether or not it's wrapped in saran wrap. So that's something to consider too. I don't think that's like increasing exposure or anything like that.
Awesome. Thanks for that. That's really helpful. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, so it's 6:28. We did say we were going to wrap up at 6:30. So we're almost done with our pre-submitted questions. Let's talk a little bit about accumulation in our bodies, because this also ties in with, we had a couple questions about PFAS, and I think we can kind of chat about how things accumulate in our bodies, both plastics and these PFAS chemicals that we're reading more about as well.
So I think we unfortunately don't know a lot in this area. I was just actually looking at the question about the PFAS being in our body, and then how do we get rid of them? And then there's an answer there, but I'm not sure who typed that one in. Is anybody more familiar with that? It says from CN, some are passing through, some probably accumulating.
Well, that was me. Sorry. So Cheryl Nunn is the river keeper with Milwaukee River Keeper, and she is our lead expert on PFAS. She's who I always go to. And so I quickly asked her yesterday when we saw this question come in, and she says that she's seen studies that show that some of them are passing through. We are seeing like PFAS in feces and things like that, but there's also, they've shown studies showing that it's going through like breast milk into infants. So some of it's accumulating, some of it's passing through. And again, you know, like Joanne said, there's just not enough research and information on PFAS, just like plastics and how they interact with our bodies.
And then, yeah, I just shared the CDC's link to some of the human health effects. So it's pretty high level, and again, not much is known. I just grabbed like a couple quotes from that where it says research has suggested that the exposure from today's consumer products, specifically of PFAS, is usually low, especially when compared to exposures to contaminated drinking water. So if you have contaminated drinking water, that's going to be significantly more exposure than just from our consumer products. Let's see, it says they also have data that shows only a small amount can actually get into your body from your skin contacting the PFAS. So if people were concerned about like showering, bathing in water that was contaminated, it's thought that the absorption from that would be quite low. So much more research to be done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a common thread here of like, we don't know. I did think the comment in the chat was interesting about giving blood help getting rid of them. I love anytime we can bring back the old school bloodletting as a treatment option. But yeah, and it's like one of those things too that one thing that we wanted to keep stressing is that, yeah, the direct effects are unknown, but at the end of the day, it's in those indirect effects on human health associated with climate change that are of the greater concern here. Especially because like, I feel like a lot of these things with plastics and toxins it's all around us. Like a lot of it, you know, isn't that avoidable, and sure, it might add up over time. We don't know. But again, we really need to be focusing on those indirect effects of climate change, and especially because those are still very preventable at this point in time.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that back up again, Alexis, because you know, that this whole webinar, part of it was just like, this stuff was freaking me out, and like, how much do I need to be worried about this? So it's really, really great to hear this, you know, that we can't avoid the exposure, but it's also not like an immediate serious health threat. Like the bigger threat is that environmental health, that big picture stuff, the planetary health. And those are the things that we can work on. You know, that's exactly what Plastic Free is doing. That's what there's other coalitions working on this. A lot of action is being taken. And so like, some of this stuff might sound scary, but actually this is giving me a lot of hope, because like you just said, you know, like we can still work on climate change. We can still work on, you know, plastic pollution, and those are the bigger threats. So this is good. This is really, really good information. Okay. So if anyone wants, it is 6:32. If anyone wants to stick around, we just had one more question that got dropped in when someone registered today. I think we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but I just want to give an opportunity for any last minute or last additional thoughts here. So Dr. Landergan described plastics as having a carbon backbone with many toxic, unregulated chemicals bound to it. As advocates for the elimination of single-use plastics, might it make more sense to zero in on the toxic chemicals that are in single-use plastic in order to persuade healthcare consumers to avoid them? And do physicians receive any education on how these toxins are in everyday plastic products? So we've talked a little bit about some of these things again. You know, Alexis had that chart up there that showed all the toxic chemicals in styrofoam, and now like we have a county styrofoam ban. So like that is something that is happening to kind of help get that out of our system, at least here in Milwaukee. Anything else you all want to chime in about that question?
I guess the only thing I would chime in is that that does sound like a very reasonable approach. And you guys have all proven that it's effective too, right? So targeting the single-use products that are potentially the most toxic absolutely seems like it makes sense.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that, because it's like, yeah, the more toxicity you can eliminate, the better. Yeah, makes complete sense.
I saw someone sent me an article today about Europe just banned a lot of single-use plastics. So these things are happening around the world. You know, Europe, like we talked about earlier, Europe's also much better about banning the toxic things before we put them in all of our products that we're using every day. So that's definitely something that we can keep pushing for and keep advocating here in the US. So that, you know, we can start to bring some of those policies and practices over here as well.
I guess quick question on the single-use plastics. I don't know if you know this or not, but just like from a definition standpoint, do they consider plastic that can technically be recycled as single use?
Yes. So like a plastic cup that can be recycled, I believe. I guess I didn't read the specifics of that, but like in the way we talk about single-use plastics, that is even if it can be recycled, it's a single use.
Okay, I was just curious. Yeah, because I was in Alaska, and you know, like a year ago or so, and we were in you know, one of the small towns there, and they like had all these signs about like banning single-use plastics, and then when we went to get our food, they handed us like plastic cups, and like we were confused about that, but it was because they considered like plastic that could still be recycled as single use, but yet we were like looking around and there was not like a single recycling bin anywhere. So it was kind of this mismatch of like, you know, the definition of what they considered single-use plastic, but then also like there was no way to recycle it. So I was just curious if that was like a global issue or just particular to, not to like call out Alaska here, but like, or if that was just like an issue for that particular area.
That's fascinating. I mean, that's definitely something to be aware of, right? Because I could see that being a really great like greenwashing tactic for anyone who's like all the companies now that are like, our products are more recyclable. Like, well, are they? And does that matter? Like, you know, we've talked about recycling being a broken system. So all the focus on improving recycling is maybe the wrong thing to focus on. I think it's fascinating that yeah, it's recyclable, it's great, but no recycling bins. All right, Jules dropped the link into the Beyond Plastics webinar in the chat. When we send out the recording for tonight's conversation, we will include that again as well. So you've got a package deal there so that you can watch them both or rewatch them both and share them with your family and friends. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for submitting your questions in advance. We're so excited to have this conversation. Joanne, Jack, Alexis, again, thank you so much for your expertise, for all the research that you put into this. Like I said, it's really helped ease my mind about what the focus is and is helping me like refocus on, you know, the important stuff that we can actually work towards. So I really appreciate your insights, and yeah, we look forward to hopefully working with you again sometime.
Yeah, if people have any follow-up questions, they watch the other webinar, feel free to send them our way, and happy to continue the conversation. Look forward to working with you guys, supporting your efforts.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for involving us.
Yeah, we're so grateful to all of you. Yeah, so if anyone does have any follow-up questions, you can email them to, I'll drop it in the chat, info@plasticfreemke.org. I can't talk and type at the same time. Feel free to email us there and we'll make sure that they get those, and we'll get some answers back to you if you have any follow-up questions. And with that, we'll wrap it up tonight. Oh, I love that quote. That's such a good quote. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So you all are a part of that. And we appreciate you all. Thanks so much for being here tonight. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week.